So we're back working on this 2014 F550, and here was my plan. I attempted to locate this connector here, this WPT1220. It's available from Ford, but it's 2 to 3 weeks away, so I've ordered it from an alternate supplier, in this case Rock Auto, and it's going to be here quicker, and it's a few dollars cheaper. The price is not the issue, it's the time. But in the meantime, I'm going to put 4 male terminals on the wires and insert them into the appropriate pins. These are the pin numbers. 1 and 2 come from knock sensor 1, and 2 and 3 go to knock sensor 2. And I imagine they're polarity sensitive, but I'm not 100% certain because the knock sensor produces an AC signal, so it may not be polarity sensitive, but we're going to try to maintain the polarity. We're using this connector pins, these 4 pins on the 2014 harness, and adapting it to these 4 pins on the 2010 harness. We're going to just make a temporary repair for now and tie up the wires so that they don't fall out, and then when I get the connector I'll make a more permanent repair. And then we're going to address the reason why it's running lean on both banks. So that gives you an idea where that connector is. You can see the wires going down behind the intake manifold. I had to work by feel to put the 4 individual wires into the 4 female terminals in the connector on the knock sensor, the dual knock sensor. Now I'm going to take this fuel rail line off. Notice the sketchy haywire and the hose clamp on there. I suspect there's no garter spring inside that quick connector, and that's why somebody haywired it on like that. But I have to take that off to put a fuel pressure gauge T in there. So we're going to do that and see what's going on. So this is the fitting that needs to be put in series in the line. I took the haywire off and this line just pulled straight off. The garter spring is in there, but it wasn't holding at all, so I'm not sure what's going on with that, but we'll put some dielectric grease on there and see if this holds. I noticed this rib isn't very tall on the existing fuel rail, so I don't know, we'll see. So I had to put a couple of tie wraps on that pressure fitting because that pipe, the flare on the end of that pipe is too small for that garter spring to grab it. I don't know why, but if we end up doing injectors on this, I'll deal with that at that time. So I got the fuel pressure gauge installed. We're gonna check it for leaks and then fire it up, and got the scanner on. We'll have a look at the fuel trims and see what the fuel pressure is doing. Well, that would probably account for the running lean condition. No matter what spec I use for the 2010 or 2014, 20 pounds wasn't the spec. It's 30 or 40, 35 to 70 or 40 to 70, depending on what information I look at. Better see if this thing's got a fuel filter on it, but I don't think it does. So you can see it's running in closed loop, and the long-term fuel trim is -30 on this bank, and long-term fuel trim is -30 on this bank. So it's reached the limit of additional fuel, probably 30%, and that's why it's setting the P0171, P0174 code. I think that's what it was. Yeah, 171, 174, plus the 2 knock sensor codes, but those are in history now. Well, definitely low fuel pressure will cause that. I don't think it's a fuel filter. In fact, I don't think this thing has one, but I'm going to have a look and see. Maybe the fuel pump's been changed at one time and the wrong one was put in. This is a mechanical returnless system, so who knows what kind of hocus pocus has happened to this truck. It came from an auction on Alberta, and the customer has no clue as to what's been done. And we already know that it's got a 2010 or vintage engine in the 2014 truck. So we'll have a look at the fuel delivery system now. So I had a look underneath this vehicle, and there is no fuel filter in the line. The fuel tank is mounted at the very back of the truck because it's a cabin chassis with a flat deck on it. Too bad it doesn't have a dump deck. That would have made it easier to access the fuel pump. Mind you, it is at the back. So here's my thought process. I'm going to run it on an alternative source of fuel and raise the fuel pressure. So I had to find the fuel pump relay. It's item number 57 in the battery junction box. So we should be able to see that here. 57 is right beside these two fuses. So unfortunately this battery junction box is back here. This is the fuel pump relay right here from what I can tell. 57. Here is the underhood inconvenience center. And this is the corner 57 right there. Right by my thumb. Look how dirty it is under that cover. This truck's been well used. So we're going to pull that relay out. That should disable the fuel pump, and we're going to connect the fuel pressure or fuel, an alternative source of fuel from a flushing machine. So here's my setup. It's an OTC injector flushing tool. The part number is there if you could read it. 7448. Basically it uses shop air pressure and a pressure regulator to supply fuel to the fuel rail. You're supposed to use a cleaning agent, but I've got straight gasoline in there. And I've got it dialed up to 30 pounds, and I've got the fuel pump relay removed, so the fuel pump is disabled, and we're going to run it on this and see how the fuel trims act. Well, that didn't work as planned. Truck wouldn't start. So I come back here and look at this, and I assume that this just fed the fuel pump, but that fuel pump relay also sends a feedback into the powertrain control module for injector power, because I got no noid light flashing and no injector pulse. So pulling that fuel pump relay is not going to work. Here is the circuit that goes to the fuel pump right here. It goes through connector 1581, and then at the fuel pump at the back. There's no separate fuse that you can remove. So unless we can disconnect this connector 1581, where is that connector? What does it look like first of all? Oh, that's a big mother connector. Oh my gosh. Let's see where it is. Because probably other things go through that connector that we need. So unless I can reach up on top of the tank and disconnect the fuel pump, I got no way to easily disable it. Well, what does it matter if it runs? I'm going to jack up the fuel pressure with another supply, so that shouldn't matter. It's not like I want to try to run it on an alternative source. Doesn't matter. Where is 1581? Yeah. So it's, oh, that's that connector there. Well, I wonder what else is in that connector. Maybe we'll have a quick look. So this is just like Ford. They give you a connector view and the connector location, but when you look at the pinouts, it doesn't say what the pinout circuits are for. You have to know the circuit numbers. They don't give you a circuit description. They just give you a circuit number, the gauge of the wire. Now, I could assume that that's for everything in the back of the truck, like tail lights and stuff. I think I'm going to see if I can find that connector and just unplug it and see what happens. That's 1581 down there, but I decided to just put the fuel pump relay back in. Now that I've got fuel pressure on there, I don't even have this turned on. I've got about 32 pounds of fuel pressure, but it was running at 20 earlier. That's strange. Why is it now 32? Let's see what the fuel trims do now. So it's in closed loop. The long-term fuel trim and short-term fuel trim are still running pretty positive. So we're going to let it run for a few minutes and see if the fuel pressure will drop. Well, the fuel pressure went down. I jacked the fuel pressure up using the remote supply to about 41 psi right now. Let's let it run for a few minutes and see if that brings the fuel trims back into spec. So you can see what happened when I jacked it up to 45 psi. Now the short-term numbers are going negative, and it'll take about 10 minutes or so, and the long-term numbers will start to go negative as well. Again, we're going to let it run like this for a few minutes. So I was at the back of the truck looking at this fuel tank thinking that's going to be fun to drop that. And I'm thinking it's got a flat deck on it. It's too bad it didn't have a hole in the deck. Then I look up closer and lo and behold, look what somebody did when they built this deck. Imagine that. Something's got to go good today. So although the short-term numbers are running lower, the long-term is not coming down. So I'm going to reset the keep alive memory. Got to do a key on, engine off. So I reset the keep alive memory so that erases the short-term and long-term tables at learned values. I'm going to start it now and run it. I'm sure it's not in closed loop yet. See, it's an open loop still. Now it's gone to closed loop. Let's see what the fuel trim numbers do now. I've got it set at about 45 psi. That says 45. So I think we're going to call the fuel pump based on this. Because if we had 40 to 45 psi fuel pressure, I'm sure it's going to run a lot better. Next, to figure out how to fix that fuel line. Well, it just started doing that. The short-term fuel trim spiked up to 20% on both banks, and the long-term numbers are creeping back up again. Yet it's running at about 44 psi. Is it possible we need 50? So I turned the fuel pressure up to 50 pounds now. You can see the short-term numbers are going down now. Negative 3.8, negative 3.8. And the long-term numbers are coming down. So this thing needs about 50 to 55 pounds of fuel pressure. Let's have a look at the spec from the Ford manufacturer. So here's what I found. 51 to 62. So if we set it to 55, which is where it is right now, I believe. Let's see how it's running now. Long-term numbers are coming down. Let's go look at the fuel pressure. It was about 52. I just turned it up to 55. So we're going to call the fuel pump on this thing. Of course, we're going to recheck it with the fuel pump in it and see what the fuel pressure is.
So here's the new fuel pump that I determined was the right one for this vehicle. I kind of like the Delphi product. I've had good luck with them. There's the new pump. I also have a new lock ring for it because the one on it is kind of rusty. So we're going to go ahead and install this pump in the tank and see how it performs. So you can see somebody provided with an access through the box of this, at the deck of this truck, which is making this significantly. Wait a second, what's going on over here? Look at these straps, are just sitting here. Both sides. Oh boy. Who knows what's been going on with this truck? I would imagine it's been worked on significantly. Well, we have to unplug these fuel lines and blow this all off. And then we can take the lock ring off. I'm going to use air chisel. So disconnect the two connectors, little release locks on them. You have to press them down, and they're full of sand, so they're a little difficult to get off. Now we got to figure out how this fuel line quick connector comes off. I think you just depress it. Yeah, I think you just depress it and blow the top of the tap. And in there, and we take the pump out. So pry open that little lock retainer and then push it across to the other side so you can pull it off. This thing had been sitting all night in the shop, so it had already relieved all the fuel system pressure or any significant fuel pressure. Now we're ready to take the lock ring off. I like to use an air chisel because it's really going to be difficult to swing a hammer in here. I'm going to see if I can get at this. And you want to be careful not to create any sparks here. Oh well. So this is pretty challenging to get in here, even though it's accessible. Using the air chisel to top this ring off. There. Now you got it out of the way. Before you remove it, blow the air off, or blow the dirt off the sand that has loosened. Alright, now we're ready to pull that out of the way. Pull the fuel pump out. And set it off to the side here. We want to look in the bottom of the tank and see if there's any sand in here. It looks relatively clean. Yeah, it does. It looks clean. Well, there's a little bit down there. Yeah, there is a little bit of sand in there. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. Yeah, you can see the sand in there. I'm going to use the suction machine for that, see if I can get it out. Oil extractor. So here's my plan. I'm going to use this oil extractor to create a vacuum and try and suck the sand off the bottom, that little patch of sand that's sitting there. If you leave it in there, it's going to tend to go into the new fuel pump and damage the new fuel pump. That's probably what damaged this one here. Pretty good. You can see a couple little bubbles of water laying there on the bottom. So watch what happens when I put the vacuum in there. Well, those are rust stains. Those are stain marks. Anyway, we got all the sand out. That's good. We only sacrificed about 2 liters of gasoline. Looks pretty good in there now. I thought those were water bubbles, but those are just stains on the bottom of the tank. So we'll clean up this O-ring seal area and put the new pump in. So I've set a magnetic parts bowl in there to keep sand. Without introducing any more sand into the. There, that's perfect. We put some dielectric grease on the O-ring and put it back together. So there's the fuel pump reinstalled. I had to use a pair of channel locks to turn that lock ring the last 1/4 inch to get it into the ears here. Dielectric grease on the seals, dielectric grease on the connectors, blow all the sand out of them. We're going to put a tie wrap here, and then we're going to bolt these fuel tank straps back down like they're supposed to be. That tank is just sitting in there. I'm sure it is. There's several gallons of gas in there, so I can't lift it. So let's see what we got for fuel pressure now with the key on it. That's not very impressive. Let's try this. That's a little better. Like I thought, 55 psi, 7 psi. So we'll have a look at the fuel trims now and button up that tank. So if you recall, that fuel line wouldn't stay on the fuel rail.
So I stole the garter spring out of this fuel line fitting that I had from my test kit. This is the replacement one. This is the service fitting that they use now for checking fuel pressure, and this used to be it. You can see it's significantly longer. And the reason why they stopped using this long one is because there's not enough room in the vehicle. So I stole this garter spring out of this service port fitting and put it in there, and it seems to be holding just fine. It's got the secondary lock on it. I'll show you what I mean by that. So it has the secondary lock. I did change this screw clamp to a fuel injection clamp, but this secondary lock holds it on just the same, just in case there's a, that doesn't hold. But it seems to be good now. Now we're going to run it and see if the fuel trims are normal. So I noticed the DLC connector was just hanging here, so I decided to bolt it or screw it back to the dash. And then I look up underneath the dash here at the brackets and stuff in here, and there's a lot of rust. Look at the rust on that cross brace. Harness hanging down, connector hanging down. Look at the rust on the bracket for the emergency brake pedal. I wonder if this vehicle was a flood victim and has been rebuilt. That would explain why all this hocus pocus. So we just started it up, looking at engine speed. Let's look at the short-term and long-term fuel trims. Long-term fuel trims coming down. No, that's RPM coming down. I didn't reset the keep alive memory, but it hasn't run long enough to update it anyways. There's short-term, long-term, and short-term. Long-term fuel trim on this bank is at 5.5%, and on this bank it's at 24%. Okay, so we're going to reset the keep alive memory. Okay, so we've got the keep alive memory reset. You can see the long-term and fuel trim numbers are both at 0. Just started, it's an open loop, so we're going to let it run while I bolt down that plate on the back of the fuel tank, or back of the deck, and come back to this after a few minutes. There we have it. It's been running now for about 20 minutes. It's updated the fuel trims, at least at the idle block cell. It's running at 0% fuel, long-term fuel trim, and -1, -4. So it's in good control now, so we're going to take it for a road test. We still have to fix that connector to the NOx sensor. I got 4 individual wires in there. Should be good enough to go for a road test to see if looking for the temperature. I don't see it in this data list. So we're going to take this for a road test. So I took this truck for a road test down the highway, and it runs beautiful. Fuel trim stayed very well within range. Long term on the entire trip never went positive, -0.84 and -0.77. Short-term fuel trims, of course, are following the O2. Now, what I don't like is the rear oxygen sensor activity. Now, I understand he had a catalytic converter installed on this as part of the safety check, because apparently it was missing. But based on the rear O2 sensor activity, that catalyst isn't doing shit. You can see the activity in the rear O2, which would be after the cat, unless they put it in the wrong place. They mentioned something about having to drill and install a bung for the O2. Well, that's secondary. It runs good. Fuel trims are normal. Power is good. Start's good now. I have that NOx sensor wiring harness to repair. But I scanned it for codes. Guess what? Catalyst efficiency pending code. Check engine light is not on now, but it's going to turn it on tomorrow when I road test it, or the next time it's driven. So there's something going on with that aftermarket catalyst, or the O2 sensor is not installed in the correct location. I'm going to talk to the customer. I haven't looked at that vehicle. I've got other work to do today, so we're going to leave this for now because I'm still waiting for that connector.